The day of my brother's engagement party, I drove 40 minutes in the rain and walked in alone, and before I even reached the hostess stand, I heard my mother's voice carrying across the room. "There she is. Couldn't even bring someone." She wasn't whispering. She never whispered when she wanted to be heard. I kept walking. I had learned to keep walking a long time ago. My name is Serena. I'm 31 years old. I'm a contract attorney at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, and for most of my adult life, my family treated me like a footnote in their own story. Not with cruelty exactly. Cruelty would have been easier to name. It was more like I had been quietly filed away somewhere, acknowledged when convenient, overlooked when not. My brother's name is Donovan. He's 3 years older than me and has always been, in my mother's words, the one who figured it out. He married his college girlfriend at 26, divorced at 29, and is now engaged to a woman named Cassandra who wears her hair in a low chignon and laughs at everything my mother says. My mother thinks this is a sign of good character. I think it's a survival strategy. Either way, the engagement party was at the Hargrove Club, a private dining room my mother had rented for 60 guests. Floral centerpieces she'd spent 3 weeks selecting, a photographer circling the room before the appetizers even came out. I had been invited. That part mattered to me more than it should have. I had actually been invited. My father called 2 days before and said, "Your mother wants everyone there. Don't make it a thing." Which was his way of telling me not to come with expectations. I didn't. I came with a gift, a dry-cleaned blazer, and the specific kind of tiredness that lives in your chest when you've been managing other people's comfort for so long that you've forgotten it's exhausting. I parked, I walked in, and before I found a single familiar face, I heard my mother's voice. She was standing near the bar with 2 of her friends, women I had known since childhood, women who had watched me grow up in the peripheral vision of my brother's achievements. She saw me, smiled the way you smile at someone you're already slightly disappointed by, and said it loud enough for the table nearest her to hear. Couldn't even bring someone. One of her friends, the one in the gold blouse, made a sympathetic sound. The other one looked away. I stopped walking for exactly 2 seconds. Then I kept going. I found my aunt near the window, kissed her cheek, took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, and stood in the corner of a room full of people celebrating my brother's happiness, while feeling, as I often did in rooms like this, completely invisible. I should explain something about my family, because without it, none of what came later makes sense. We grew up in a house where achievement was the primary language of love. My father worked in commercial real estate. My mother ran the household with the precision of a project manager and the emotional range of a performance review. Donovan was good at school, good at sports, good at being the kind of son you introduced at parties. I was good at different things, quieter things, slower-burning things, and I figured out early that those things didn't translate well at the dinner table. I read constantly. I argued about things. I asked questions my mother found exhausting. I chose to go to law school instead of moving back home after college, which she interpreted as a personal rejection that she has never fully recovered from. "You always have to do things your own way," she said, the day I told her. Not as a compliment. My father was easier to understand. He had simply decided that Donovan was the one worth investing in, and he had made peace with that decision in the quiet, efficient way that men of his generation make peace with things. He wasn't unkind to me. He was just elsewhere. Even when he was standing right next to me. I'd spent most of my 20s trying to earn my way out of that footnote. Good grades, good firm, good performance reviews. I sent birthday cards on time. I showed up to things. I kept my feelings mostly to myself because I had learned that expressing them created more discomfort for everyone else than it resolved for me. And still, somehow, I always ended up standing in the corner of rooms like this one, alone, watching my mother tell a story I wasn't in. The dinner was seated. I was at table 6, which I had to ask a staff member to help me find because my name wasn't on any of the table cards I could see from the entrance. When I finally located it, I was between my second cousin Philip, who I had not spoken to in 4 years and who spent the entire meal on his phone, and an empty chair that turned out to belong to a family friend who never showed. Donovan came over at some point during the salad course. He hugged me, asked how the drive was, said he was glad I made it. He meant it, I think. Donovan has always been easier than my mother. He doesn't dislike me. He just orbits the same gravity she does, and I've never been massive enough to pull him out of it." Cassandra waved at me from across the room. I waved back. My mother did not come to table 6. By the time the main course arrived, I had finished my water, declined wine, and started to feel the particular weight of being somewhere you were invited to, but not actually wanted at. It's a specific feeling, different from being uninvited. Worse in some ways because you can't be angry about it without looking unreasonable. I was cutting into my salmon when I heard it. My mother was at the center table, 2 tables away, speaking to a group of her friends and my father's colleagues. She was telling a story, her voice bright, her hands moving, and I caught the words "always been like that," and she just doesn't try. And then, clearly, with no effort to lower her volume, I don't know what she's waiting for. She's 31 and she still can't keep a man interested for more than 6 months. Philip looked up from his phone. The woman across from me stopped chewing. I set down my fork. I did not look at my mother. I looked at my water glass. There was a small crack of lipstick on the rim from the last person who'd used it, a pale pink smear, and I stared at it for a long moment and felt something in me go very, very still. I picked up my fork again. I finished my salmon. I did not cry. I did not leave. But I looked up once at no one in particular, and I said quietly, just loud enough for Philip and the woman across from me to hear, "Remember this dinner." Philip looked at me. I didn't explain. After dessert, I excused myself and stepped outside. There was a small courtyard behind the Hargrove Club, mostly concrete, a couple of iron chairs, one sad planter full of rosemary. I stood out there for about 8 minutes and breathed. My phone buzzed. A text from a number saved under the name H. Just the letter. "How's it going?" I typed back, "Fine. Remember this dinner." 3 dots. Then, "Do I want to know?" Later I wrote, "I'll be home by 10. I put my phone away and went back inside. I need to tell you about H, because this is the part people always want explained, and I understand why. It seems like a twist, like a device, like something manufactured for effect. It isn't. It's just the truth, and it happened slowly, over 4 years, the way true things usually do. His full name is Harrison Webb. He's 37. He runs a private investment firm. Not flashy, not the kind of thing that shows up in Forbes profiles, but the kind of thing that moves money quietly through infrastructure projects and clean energy funds and occasionally acquires mid-sized companies before anyone outside the room knows they're for sale. He has 2 people who handle his public presence, which means he has almost no public presence. He prefers it that way. We met at a conference for contract law professionals in Raleigh. I was there because my firm sent me. He was there because one of the panel speakers was an old professor of his, and he'd made a last-minute decision to drive up and say hello. We ended up at the same table at the evening reception, talking for 3 hours about merger arbitration and a book we both read about institutional trust, and then exchanging numbers in the parking garage at 11 o'clock like 2 people who were surprised to have found each other. We dated for 8 months before I told my mother. When I did, she asked what his family did, then whether he had an ex-wife, then whether I was sure I wasn't settling because of the pressure of getting older. I stopped bringing him up after that. We got married 14 months ago. Small ceremony, 40 people, my aunt in the front row, Donovan as my only family representative who knew. My mother and father were not there. Not because I didn't invite them, I did, in a letter, 3 months before. But my mother called after receiving it and said she couldn't support this, and she needed me to think about what I was doing, and by the time she was done talking, I had quietly decided that she had made her choice and I had made mine. I kept wearing my ring. It's not extravagant. A thin gold band with a single small diamond. Nothing that would read as anything other than a normal engagement ring if you weren't looking. At family events, I wore it on my right hand. Not to hide it exactly. More because I had learned that introducing Harrison into my family's orbit would require a kind of emotional labor. I wasn't ready to perform, and I had decided I was tired of performing. My mother had no idea I was married. 2 weeks after the engagement party, I got a call from Donovan. He had heard, he said, from Cassandra's father that there was an investment group in Charlotte looking to acquire a controlling interest in a regional logistics company. The logistics company happened to be the one our father had put 40% of his retirement savings into 3 years ago. Donovan was nervous. He wanted to know if I had any contacts who could tell him whether the acquisition was hostile or friendly, whether the company was in trouble, whether he should tell Dad. I listened. I asked a few questions. I told him I'd look into it. I already knew about the acquisition. I had known for 6 weeks. Not because of any inside information, because Harrison's firm had been the one advising the acquiring group, and I had recused myself from the related legal work at my firm the moment I realized the overlap. Professional ethics, clean hands, standard procedure. But I knew the outcome, and the outcome was not good for minority stakeholders. I called Donovan back the next day and told him what I could tell him legally, which was to advise your father to consult a financial advisor and not to wait. I did not explain how I knew. He thanked me, sounded confused, and said he'd pass it on. My father called me a week later. He had sold his stake before the announcement. He didn't lose anything. He was quiet on the phone, quieter than usual, and at the end of the conversation he said, "How did you know?" I said, "I work in contract law, Dad. I pay attention." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Serena." That was the whole conversation. But my father had never said thank you to me for anything professional before, in 31 years, and he said it like it cost him something. Like he was beginning to understand something he hadn't let himself understand before. I said, "Of course," and we hung up, and I stood in my kitchen for a long time, not quite knowing what I felt. A month later, my mother called me. She was planning a birthday dinner for my father, his 65th, a milestone, and she wanted me to come. There was a new edge in her voice that I hadn't heard before, something tentative underneath the usual instructions. "Will you be bringing anyone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. A pause. "Who?" "My husband," I said. The silence stretched long enough that I counted my own heartbeats. 4, 5, 6. "You're married," she said. Not a question, a statement she was placing in the world to see how it felt. "For 14 months," I said. "Serena." "Mom." Another pause. Then, very carefully, "What's his name?" "Harrison." "You'll meet him at dinner." I hung up before she could say anything else. "Harrison, you'll meet him at dinner." I hung up before she could say anything else. Not out of anger, out of self-protection. There is a difference, and I've spent years learning to tell them apart. The birthday dinner was at my parents' house, 30 people. The same format as every other family gathering of my life. My mother moving through the room, my father holding court in the living room, Donovan and Cassandra arriving with wine and the easy confidence of people who have never had to earn their place at a table. Harrison and I arrived together. He was wearing a dark navy blazer and the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are. He held the door for me. He introduced himself to my aunt first, which I had not asked him to do, but which told me, as it always does, that he pays attention to things. My mother saw us from across the room. I watched her face process it, the ring on my left hand. I'd switched it back. The man standing next to me, the way he said hello to people, the quality of his presence. My mother is good at reading rooms. She has spent 60 years practicing. I saw her recalibrate in real time, smile adjusting, posture shifting, and she crossed the room with the particular grace of someone who has decided to absorb new information without showing that it has surprised her. "Harrison," she said, extending her hand. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, and smiled. She looked at me. I looked back. I did not say, "Remember this dinner." I didn't have to. I had said it 6 weeks ago in a courtyard behind a restaurant, when I was sitting next to an empty chair and she was telling her friends I couldn't keep a man interested. I had said it to myself and to Philip, who would never understand what I meant, and to the small, quiet version of myself that had been keeping score for a very long time. She knew. Not everything, not yet, but she knew she had miscounted. After dinner, my father pulled Harrison aside. I don't know everything that was said. Harrison told me some of it later, standing in our kitchen at midnight with his jacket off and a glass of water in his hand. He said my father had asked how long we'd been together. Harrison told him. My father asked what he did for work. Harrison told him plainly, without performance, just the facts. My father nodded slowly and said, "She never told us." Harrison said, "She had reasons." My father didn't ask what the reasons were. He already knew. He had always known, I think. He just hadn't been willing to look at it directly until there was no other direction to look. Later, when Harrison and I were driving home, I asked him what else they talked about. He said, "Your father asked if you were happy." I looked out the window. The highway was mostly empty, orange lights passing overhead in a rhythm. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said you were working on it," Harrison said, "and that you were very good at it." I laughed, which surprised me. A real laugh, sudden and short, the kind that catches you off guard. "That's an honest answer," I said. "He deserved an honest one," Harrison said. We drove the rest of the way in quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. The other kind, the kind that means you're with someone who doesn't need you to fill the space. My mother called me 3 days later. She was different on the phone, not dramatically different. My mother is not a dramatic person in the way people expect. She doesn't sob or make speeches. But the quality of her attention had shifted. She asked how I was, and she waited for the actual answer instead of moving on to what she wanted to say. She said, "I didn't know you were unhappy." I thought about how to answer that for a long time. Long enough that she made a small sound, a throat clearing, and I said, "I wasn't always unhappy. I was invisible. Those are different things." She was quiet. "I stopped telling you things," I said, "because every time I did, it became about what you thought I should be doing differently. I wasn't unhappy. I was just tired." She said, "I didn't know I was doing that." I said, "I know." And I did know. That was the thing I had spent years making peace with. Not the cruelty, because it wasn't cruelty, but the obliviousness. The way someone can love you imperfectly and not know it. And the way you can know that and still feel the shape of what was missing, like a missing tooth. Something your tongue keeps finding in the dark. She asked if she could meet for coffee sometime. Just the two of us. I said yes. I don't know what that will become. I'm not optimistic in a storybook way. I've read enough family narratives to know that one dinner and one phone call don't rewrite 30 years. But I'm also not closed. I've been closed for a long time, and it has kept me safe. But it has also kept me in a particular kind of loneliness that I'm tired of carrying. So I said yes, and I meant it. There's something I want to be clear about, because I've told pieces of this story to people before, and I've seen the way it gets interpreted. I didn't win because of Harrison. I didn't win because he walked into my parents' house in a good blazer and shook my father's hand, and turned out to be exactly the kind of man my family would respect on their own terms. That's not the victory. That's just circumstance. The victory, if that's even the right word, is smaller and quieter than that. It's that I built something real while nobody was watching. I did it without their approval, without their presence, without the validation that I used to need, the way you need oxygen when you're young and don't know yet that you can make your own. I made choices my mother thought were mistakes, and they turned out not to be. I married someone in a small ceremony with 40 people, and I wore a dress I loved, and I cried during the vows because I meant them, and my mother wasn't there, and it was still one of the best days of my life. That's the thing I kept from her, not Harrison, not the ring, the knowledge that I could have a best day without her permission, the dinner at the Hargrove Club, the empty chair, the comment about not being able to keep a man. None of it broke me. It stung. I won't pretend it didn't. I stood in a courtyard with rosemary and cracked lipstick glasses and felt the sting of it move through me like something cold. But I kept going. I went back inside. I finished my dessert. I drove home. And now I'm sitting in my own house, in a life I built on my own terms, and my mother wants to get coffee, and my father said thank you for the first time in 31 years, and somewhere in all of that is something that doesn't have a clean name, but feels, finally, like enough. Not perfect. Not what I would have written if I were writing the story from the beginning, but enough, and honestly, for the first time in a long time, I think I am too. I used to think the hardest part was being overlooked. I'd since learned. The harder part is staying anyway, showing up to the dinner, sitting at table 6, cutting into your salmon while someone 2 tables away explains to a room full of people why you haven't figured out your life yet. Staying without shrinking. That's the part nobody talks about because it doesn't make for a clean story. It just makes for a life. What I know now, after all of it, is the things we build in private are the most honest things about us. I didn't build my career for my mother's approval. I didn't marry Harrison to have something to show at family dinners. I did those things because I had decided, somewhere in my mid-20s, that I was going to stop waiting for my family's version of me to become something worth investing in, and I was going to build my own version instead, quietly, without announcement, the way you build anything that's meant to last. And here is the thing about building quietly. The people who dismissed you don't see it coming. Not because they're stupid, but because they stopped looking. My mother stopped really looking at me years ago. She had already decided what I was. The difficult one, the distant one, the one who couldn't keep a man interested for more than 6 months. And once a person decides that about you, they stop collecting new evidence. They just keep confirming what they already believe. That's not cruelty. That's just how people work when they're not paying attention. And I spent a long time being angry about it before I understood that her inattention was actually information. It told me exactly how much of my energy I should be spending trying to change her mind. The answer, it turned out, was very little. What changed everything wasn't Harrison walking into my parents' house. It was the moment I realized I had already won the only argument that mattered, the one with myself. I had stopped believing I needed their version of success to validate my own. And once I stopped needing it, something loosened in me that had been tight for a very long time. Donovan isn't a villain in this story. Neither is my mother, really. They are people who loved me imperfectly and didn't know it. And there's a version of me, the younger one, the one who sat at table 6 next to an empty chair, who would have needed them to understand that before she could move forward. This version of me doesn't. This version understands that other people's awareness of your worth is not a prerequisite for your worth existing. My father said thank you. My mother wants coffee. I said yes to both. I don't know what comes next. I'm not naive enough to think one dinner rewrites 30 years. But I'm also not closed off anymore, and that matters, because being closed off kept me safe, but it also kept me alone in a way that I was tired of carrying. What I want to say, to anyone who has ever sat in the corner of a room they were technically invited to, is this: keep building. Not for them, not to prove anything, just because the life you're building in the quiet is real, and it's yours, and one day the room will catch up to what you already know about yourself. It always does, not as revenge, just as time doing what time does, eventually showing everyone exactly who is paying attention all along.